Hello, all African leaders. Come take notes from this young Gambian boy on how we can eradicate poverty from Africa. A lot of leaders don't know this. And this young boy, pan-Africanist, he has points. I want us to listen to this video. I want us to watch this video. And I want you to take points and tell me in the comment section, do you think he's right? Because for me, he's great. Let's watch this and then we go talk about it.
Even a foreign language cannot be used by a country to develop.
And you are speaking English right now.
But that is the issue. That is the product of our education system. If I speak my native language, the African, other Africans will not understand it. That is the disconnection that exists. I speak 4 different languages. But if I speak those languages, I can only communicate with people in West Africa.
So are you saying that we can be able to develop with that kind of ethnic diversity, different languages? Then what we used to communicate, are we heading back to side language in barter trade back in the days?
No, but I think, we live in a very advanced world whereby English that we are speaking today is not a traditional language in Africa. It was introduced, programmed with strategies. To some extent, we all adapted. Can't we do the same? Or is there anything that exists as these are the people who knows it all and they do it all, and some individuals don't and they cannot do it? Swahili, for instance, there is a progress in East Africa where so many countries now have adopted it as official language. It is being taught in schools, and that is empowering the young people in believing in a language. Language is very important. A Chinese can become a doctor without being able to speak English and French. And that is not possible for a Nigerian, not possible for even a Rwandan, not even possible for a Gambian. That is the wrong that we are talking about in the education system. So we have to be able to produce individuals with skills, with knowledge, with everything, relying on our realities. And that in the first step in that is changing or designing the curriculum that fits the African purpose with African languages that can be generalized within the continent, where people try to embrace them bit by bit. But without that, our call can never be realized.
Very true. Do we see some success stories in Africa?
Sure, there are. We just talked about Rwanda, for instance. We have seen what is going on in Mauritius. We have seen other countries like in Kenya. We have seen countries like in South Africa and etc. Even though if you analyze most of them in depth, you come to realize that they also have like few lapses in some of their models and etc. Some of them are still trapped with foreign aid, with debts, loans, from Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF, the World Bank. We've seen recently how Chinese are using their financial, strength to more of recolonize African countries. As a result of the little finance that they're giving us, using paper money in exchange with our valuable resources. But we have these problems, but it doesn't mean that we can't fix it. We can fix it. We just have to look inward. We have to start looking down, because relying on the West has not solved the problem. And Gavi said one thing that was very important. Any leadership that teaches you to rely on another race for survival, that leadership will enslave you.
Osman, we've been reading this great book with you, The Post-Development Reader. And present something like a mainstream media propaganda. How do you support that?
Thank you so much. I think that is the work of Majid and Victoria, which is a very good work in development studies. But basically, if you look at the mainstream media, it operates in a way that way before the publication of this very book, in fact, it has ever been there. And that is the beauty of academic, because they can always look into things that happen in our societies and come up with solution to it. I will recommend every development student to automatically visit this very literature. Now, looking at the mainstream media, we have been portrayed as a continent in a way that there is no life in this continent. The continent is not developing. It is looked at as a continent that only has poverty in it. These are the images shown by the outside world about Africa. And this image must change. It must change in a way that if an image portrays poverty, it doesn't attract investors to come. Africa must have an image that attracts investment. Not foreign investment, but investment by Africans themselves. We have so many individuals living in the diaspora, and that is why I always make this call. Africa is the future for investment, but Africans have to take the lead in it. And I'm saying this because if you look at the mainstream media today, we have millions of people living in the streets of America as homeless. They do not want us to see that. They don't want us to see poverty existing in European countries. We've seen how Britain is. We've seen, how Italy is. We've seen how some of these countries are. They have their own issues that they find it difficult to solve among themselves. Just one example. Look at how the Ebola epidemic was portrayed, and Africans were portrayed during this crisis or during this disease outbreak. And what happened when the COVID was killing people in the Western world? These images were not shown. So that is why it's high time for us as Africans to develop media outlets among ourselves. And medias that are not in line with our principles, with our agendas, we have to kick them out of the continent. It's either they be neutral and show the beautiful part of the continent as well, or else they stay in their own countries. That is the fact. But we cannot just be here and being portrayed in a way that, as if there is no life. So they have to be neutral. And if you look at this very book, you will understand how media has a role to play in balancing power at the international level. That is why you see all these so-called superpowers have a media outlet that propagates their own agendas, even though sometimes they are built on, promises that are not even materialistic. So we must be aware of this. And the mainstream media have been the cause of most of the problems in Africa. They portray the Western world as if everything there is perfect, brainwashing the youths who doesn't have time to look in depth as to what is happening. And therefore we have seen Africans dying in the Mediterranean Sea. We have seen Africans dying in refugee camps in Europe. We have seen Africans being sent to prisons. Innocent people treated differently just because they are in different continent or just because of the color of their skin. So all these things are happening because of the mainstream media. So we must be aware of it now. Develop media outlets and build up a network among themselves, and they have the African agenda forward. Then Africa can have a single voice.
A single voice for Africa.
Africa 24 is indeed a great media. I think those are some of the individuals that we really need to empower, and making sure that Africans invest in media outlets like this, so that they can have the opportunity to extend their channels across the continent and even beyond the continent, to make sure that Africans are informed with the best things happening in the continent as well. But if we don't know what is happening, we find it difficult to embrace it. So media is very important. It is one of those most important instruments that you can use to change a society, because the first step in realizing a development model or a development agenda is through communication. And communication has to be built in a way that it is persuasive in nature, whereby it can ignite the spirit of participation, the spirit of responsibility in an individual, for them to take up visions as collective in a particular society to make change. So media outlets owned by Africans in the continent must be empowered.
Welcome back. As a matter of fact, it's very hard to eradicate poverty from Africa, according to the African leaders. African leaders have made it to be so hard to eradicate poverty from Africa, and they go on round saying things that, blah, 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 this and that and that. But there is key things we can do for us to eradicate poverty from Africa. And one thing is about education system. The colonizer, when they came in Africa, they had one agenda. The agenda was to take power of Africa. The agenda was to take over Africa. And how can they do that? And they came out with the education system where each countries they are colonizing, they are speaking their language so that they can understand each other. The British, they imposed English on us. France with French. We had Germany, Portuguese, all those countries. Like we had French and English. So now a lot of African countries are speaking these languages that are not our languages. If we had a language that all of Africans are communicating with, it's easy to communicate and easy to make things happen. And that's why we are championing for Swahili to be national language, to be language for Africa. Each and every African can be able to speak Swahili. Because when the colonizers came, they came to Nigeria, they found some speaking Pidgin, speaking these languages, and it was hard for them to bring them together. So they decided, you know what, let us give them education and give them our language with its France. When they came in Kenya, they found us speaking Kikuyu, Luo, Kamba, and it was hard for them to conquer. So they had to bring English so that we all can speak the language that we can understand each other. So it was easy for them to conquer us. But there's a number of ways we can eradicate poverty from Africa. First of all, I want you to comment down there. What do you think about that boy's ideas? Because for me, it's perfect. This is a young African with a perfect mind. A lot of leaders cannot think like this. And eradicating poverty in Africa is a complex challenge that requires a multifactorial approach. It involved addressing economic, social and political and environmental factors. For example, I've just said about education and skill development. When we improve access to quality education, invest in primary, secondary and vocal education, it will bring great impact in Africa. For example, when you educate the youths, the young ones, they grow up becoming more intelligent and they will bring change. And that's what the Belgium did. That's what the French did. They got hold on the young ones, on the children, and they taught them. They bring Christianity, they bring the language. So when these young grew up, they changed everything and started acting like the Westerners. When you promote gender equality and in education, again, it's a great deal for Africa by ensuring girls and women have equal opportunities to learn and work, so that all we can be at that state of changing Africa, so that we can eradicate poverty from Africa. We can focus on technical and digital skills to match labor market demands. But we have education system that I think it's not for the well-being of Africa, because technology and digital and technology, all of them comes from Europe, other countries. For example, Russia is in Africa because they offer technology. But when we have this education on our children, it will be a great deal for us. Look what Burkina Faso is trying to do. Ibrahim Traore is trying to strengthen education system in the country. He's trying to put, brains in the mind of Burkina Faso's youths and children. This is for the future. It cannot work today, but for future, it will help in eradicating poverty. Another way we can eradicate poverty from Africa is through agriculture transformation, like to have modern agriculture where people we can provide access into modern farming techniques, equipments, and high yield seeds. Because you may find we have big lands, big tracts of lands, and yet we don't use them for anything, just laying there dormant. Because we don't have technology, we don't have how we can, produce yields from these farms. For example, you go somewhere deep in the village where people have large tracts of lands, and yet you cannot farm this land by using of hand. You need to access machineries, tractors. You need to access seeds. You need to access modern technology for you to be able to do something good in that land. And that's why you see even Burkina Faso, they have mastered this. That's why they are going for education. They are going for agriculture. They are going for things that are the backbones of the countries. Because when you hold something that is backbone of the country, it's important for the coming generation. Change will come by force, by fire. We need to focus into health and social protection, investing in healthcare, social safety nets, and family planning. All of these are factors that can help to eradicate poverty from Africa. Another thing is to increase markets of the agricultural things that we are growing. For example, improve storage, transport, and distribution channels to reduce post-harvest losses and connect farmers with buyers. We have large tracts of lands. We have poor infrastructure, bad roads. We have plant maize somewhere deep in the village, but cannot be transported to the city, cannot be connected to the buyers because we have poor transport system. So when we work on this, in building infrastructure, building roads, it will play perfect role in eradicating poverty, because we will not lose a lot of farm products, goods that we will not plant our maize, vegetable, and go go bad, because we have good roads that can connect the buyers and the seller easily. We need to do land reforms to ensure that equitable access to land and secure tenure rights for the smallholder farmers. A lot of politicians in Africa are holding lands which are not theirs, large tracts of lands, and they are not doing something with it. And yet we have poor people, small-scale farmers who cannot access lands. And these lands that these politicians are holding, they grabbed from them. Give their land back. We need to have these land reforms. Let people have lands. Let them cultivate. Let them do agriculture. Let them grow their products there. Land reforms is one way of eradicating poverty. We have a lot of people in the street because they cannot get access to lands. I personally am an example. I do not have access in any land, even soil, on my own name, simply because there's some people who grabbed the lands of my great-great-grandfathers and now just living in streets, maybe as squatters and everything. So I cannot access land here. For me personally, I'm a good example. And it's one way of, I'm still circumnavigating in this poverty. I cannot do agriculture because agriculture is what is making Africa great. Agriculture can make me rich easily, but I cannot access to agriculture. I cannot do anything because I don't own soil. I don't own anything to help me do that agriculture. So I need to struggle to get a piece of land to start. And when you get a piece of land, it's not easy for people who don't have lands. It's not easy. And yet we have foreigners who are owning big lands. We have politicians who have grabbed lands, owning big lands here, and they don't do something with them. The land is just staying dormant in the name of this is a land of certain politician. And people are happy celebrating. This big land is for this politician. It's bad. It's painful. And I am an example. What I talk here, sometimes I'm an example of what's happening. I know. When we talk about poverty, I know what I'm talking about. I know what we're talking about. I know what people are going through. I know it's hard for even a small change in your life. Because whenever you have that small change, for example, as me, that small change, I become the head of that family now. I become the face of the family. Now the family will be looking at me to bring change in the family. And by doing that, I will continue circumnavigating in this poverty because any single cent I get, I will be trying to change the family and I will end up with nothing and they will end up with nothing. So it's hard. So we need to do land reforms in Africa. Give back lands to the true ownership. The small scale farmer, let them have, freedom to do what they do. We need to have good governance and corruption. We need to have leaders who will say no to corruption. We need to have more Ibrahim Traores. We need to have more Olongis. This is Gabon president. We need to have more presidents who will stand and say no to corruption, who will fight corruption, who will build transparent and accountability governance system, who will implement strict anti-corruption measures to ensure the resources are used effectively. That's what we need, so that we can eradicate poverty from Africa. We need to venture into technology and innovation. A lot of youths here in Africa are going out of Africa. They are taking brains out of Africa, because in Africa we cannot work like that. Whenever someone small or a young man out there started doing something dealing with technology, he's being taken away. Or his dreams will be cut short because he cannot access enough technology or digital system so that to help him grow his skills. We don't have support of innovation, encouragement, tech-driven solution. We don't have that here in Africa. But when we have that, it will help us eradicate poverty from Africa. Another thing that we need to do so that we can eradicate poverty from Africa, to have internal partnership, to ensure internal aid aligns with local priorities and fosters self-resilience, advocate for equitable trade policies and market access for African products, work towards reducing unsustainable debt burdens that hinder development. So achieving this goal requires requires commitment and collaboration from African governments, local communities, international organizations, and private sectors. The first thing I said is African governments. African governments need to be united. And when they are united, the United Nations, the SADC, the ECOWAS, they need to come up with strategies that can help them eradicate poverty. And like one of the things I've said, technology and innovative, how to to support good governance and corruption, health and social protection, agriculture transformation, education and skill development. All these things will help us eradicate poverty from Africa. But what our leaders are doing, they are taking power and start eradicating poverty from the white people, eradicating poverty in France, eradicating poverty in USA. They are not there for us. They are there for other people. And that's why we are saying they are the puppets. So, I know you've heard the video of that boy. He's a young pan-Africanist, and he has said his points. We need to have one language that all Africans can speak. We need to have Swahili as a language of all people, because we cannot be using other people's language and say that we will be able to communicate well and to eradicate poverty. We need to have that strength. We need to have one language, not divided. Because once we are divided, we're not going to do anything for Africa. Tell me what you think in the comment section about this video. Until next episode, I say peace be with you.